The live buttons are clicking, status bars are updating. All right, good morning. Today is Monday, June 23rd, 2025. I'm your host, rdizzle408, with co-host ML. Welcome to America's Talk Show, the unaffiliated follow-up to Mark Halperin's Two-Way. Let's embrace peace, love, and understanding as we discuss the news cycle, which tends to be anything but. All right, folks, let's get into our normal view. No silliness now. Now we're being serious, okay? Continuing over from Mark's show in the morning, let's see. He kind of ended with the Fetterman interview. I thought that was interesting. And then he went on to what's in the news, right? Regime change, yes or no? I have some other notes that we can get into, right? I've put them in the chat, but I'm going to leave it open here. So just to start off, the Fetterman interview or the Iran-Israel thing, or Andre was also on. So we have three doors. Door number one, door number two, door number three.
I want to say I love that Andre was on, and I love that we have a regular, that we have a regular Ukraine expert, and I would say,
door number three,
global coalition expert in our midst, and I love it. So, hats off to you, Andre.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, it was a busy weekend with the late shows, all the emergency shows that Mark was doing. I didn't like what Emma was bringing up. Josh, if you missed the late shows, Emma was trying to compare what was happening in Ukraine with what was happening with the reaction to the Iran strike on Saturday night when Mark went live. But otherwise, yeah, like I said in the live show this morning, Ukraine was one of the strongest statements out there. Their statement actually cites, a UN resolution that the U.S. could point in the face of people. Deb Shea actually brought that up at the UN Security Council yesterday, saying that there were resolutions going against Iran and its nuclear proliferation, but they decided not to go for the whole Colin Powell shaking canister thing about their evidence this time. I think it's going to. I have an interview in 45 or half an hour, and then this morning's interview before this, questions arising about how Trump is going to react at the NATO summit. For me, it was kind of like how he treated the Gang of Eight. The fact that you're not going to communicate with them at all, and then. Which isn't something that you're required to do, and you're not going to talk to Congress. Congress is going to, you can't wrangle all those people. Obama learned that with Syria and other times that he turned to Congress. But if you don't communicate to the Gang of Eight, and then we're going in for a supplemental on this, right? Those MOPs don't cost 50 cents. They're not extra stored.
Yeah.
We need extra fuel for the flyovers. We need for the flyovers and the extra naval deployments. There's going to be an emergency supplemental for this, but you decided to just piss off the entire Democratic opposition who would be in favor of it. Chuck Schumer, there's people who are in favor of this, but you just had to go and thumb your nose at them.
Thank you for that, Andre. Joshua, did you want to follow up to that?
Yeah, I did. I was incredibly busy this weekend, so I didn't have a lot of opportunities to follow any of the emergency news or the emergency podcasts. But what do you make of what Erdogan said? I did hear a little bit of what he said in an attempt. I don't know what you think of the veracity of the attempt, but when he made the attempt that or the pitch that the surrounding Middle Eastern Muslim nations ought to be supporting one another as Muslim nations against Israel.
Yeah, that's going to be his line, but I think more than anything, so it was Kuwait and Iraq that spoke at the United Nations, both condemning this. Because of sovereignty issues, they just don't want. Their line is, we don't want America to go around unimpeded and dropping bombs in the Middle East or anywhere, I guess. But for them, it's a red line about stop doing this, and Kuwait, Iraq, both places that owe something to us, we're not willing to go on record to support this. Other Muslim countries as well aren't in support of this. Muslim country unity is not something that there's some things they agree on. Israel is probably the number one thing that they agree on. But there are other things, Ukraine called out when Crimea was invaded, which is majority Muslim, then none of the Muslim countries ever stood up for that other than Turkey. And Turkey then has this weird straddling of being a majority Muslim country, but also a Turkic country, and which is the more important priority for Erdogan changes from time to time? Is it the Turkic international movement or the Muslim movement?
Guys, I just want to take a moment to welcome in Stan. Stan, how you doing there? And if you want to hang out, Stan, that's cool. If you want to, if you have anything you want to chime in, just when folks are kind of first time here, we want to give them a chance to, let it out, because maybe they've talked to Mark for like 15 seconds and then got cut off or something.
You may have mentioned it before I got in here. I just happened to see something a little bit earlier that Putin was asked about the situation, and he mentioned that Israel has, I forgot, so many millions of former Russian citizens, and so it sounded like he was almost, actually, in a way, it was almost humorous, like he might be wanting to annex Israel, but no, not really. But still, it was interesting that he was kind of clearly saying, no, we're not going to take any kind of action against Israel.
And Stan, I didn't get a chance to join Mark's show this morning. Were you in there at all in the Zoom chat? Okay. Yeah. Were there any other? All this stuff is kind of fresh right now. So, is there anything else you wanted to expand on there or add to that?
Well, I think I mentioned it. I mentioned it when I before I asked my question. But Ashley, who was there, had a real good kind of a historical context take for a lot of us in our generation, which is I was 13 years old when they had our hostages, and that was a really grueling experience for well over a year. And I remember when they were released in Reagan's inauguration, and what kind of an impact that made on public perception of politics at that time. So,
and Stan, if you wouldn't mind letting the viewers know where you're chiming in from.
Oh, I'm from Conroe, Texas, which is north of Houston in Montgomery County.
Great.
I mentioned in the when we were chatting with Mark that Texas Monthly claims that Montgomery County is the reddest county in Texas, which Ted Cruz owes us because he would not have beaten Beto O'Rourke back in 2018 without us.
I'm proud to call myself a Cal Texan, and my goal in life is to become bi-coastal so that my folks we can visit Texas in the summer, become winter Texans, and then bounce back to California when it's too hot out there. And then when it gets too hot in California for the politics, we can go back to Texas and, be.
You said you want to come to Texas in the summer?
No. They call them winter Texans. What is it? The winter. So go to Texas in the winter.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And then I guess we would be summer Texans out here, or summer Californians. I don't know.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
But glad to have you. And since you brought up the hostages and whatnot, right? I was doing a little digging into, and I'm curious to get Joshua's take on this, because we often hear about Operation Ajax and Mossadegh, but then I was thinking, wait a minute, wasn't Mossadegh prime minister at the time? So, yeah. Joshua, did you want to?
Yeah, Mossadegh was appointed, by the way. Yes,
so
he was appointed.
Appointed under a monarchy. So then how can there even be a claim of a coup, right? Because I put it in the chat, right? It was a Tablet magazine article that said there have been like almost a dozen prime ministers before and after Mossadegh. So what was a non-event for us growing up? I also thought, oh my God, the prime minister. I thought basically the monarchy had gone away and there was Mossadegh, but the monarchy was always there. So it's up to the monarch who is going to be PM, who's not going to be PM, right?
Yeah, I grew up under that same assumption, and it's almost like, in the United States, well, not everybody's here actually in the United States, but we have the infamous lost cause ideology that was taught, in the early 20th century on into to the late 20th century, that said that the Confederacy was formed to protect states' rights, right? And it sort of removed slavery from that aspect. Well, in this same sense, we were all taught that, the CIA overthrew the duly elected leader of Iran to bring the Shah back, and it's like, nah, that didn't happen. Now, it didn't happen like that, but I will say, when Mossadegh, when he was appointed, he wanted to, his big thing was that he wanted to nationalize the Iranian oil fields, but the Shah at this point, he really wanted to open Iran for Western investment, and he had and I think he famously said that where America is now, Iran will be in 10 years, and then in such and such. So he had a real plan to bring Iran into the modern world. But to a certain extent, he did things. He tried to do things too quickly. Also, we're in an age where we don't have the internet, we don't have instant communication, and so the Ayatollah Khomeini's thoughts, not thoughts, his statements that he was making while in exile were very moderate. And nobody really, and nobody had read his books, which were super ultra Islamic conservative. So there was a big disconnect there between what he was saying publicly and what he had written. And then also, the big problem with authoritarians is that, in order to maintain an authoritarian regime, and again, it's all kinds, whether you want to call the Shah a benevolent dictator or not, a dictator he was. And, in order to maintain that, you really can't afford to allow dissent. And his secret police, the Savak, were brutal, absolutely brutal. And there was absolutely torture, absolutely repression in Iran under the Shah of political dissidents.
The Shah in the 60 Minutes interview says all he did was use the CIA tactics, compromat, right? I mean, none of us were there. This is the issue, right? Because what all we're getting is an Islamist, typically, perspective of the Shah. And I mean, okay, this is what stood out to me. When this pro-regime protest came out, black-clad burqas, right? Not Persian women with their hair showing, saying, oh, no, this, regime is evolving. It was like the typical, the stereotypical look, right? So that's why I was like, wait a minute. Did this thing of Mossadegh, I was like, hold on. Let me Google this. And that's when I found the Tablet magazine article, because again, the way I had grown up, the thinking was that this prime minister was in charge. But again, if it's just weird. We're in an age where the UK has a monarchy lifelong, and that's fine. But it's like other monarchies, it's like, oh no, human rights. So again, I'm not expressing like this support for regime change. What I'm saying is we need to just step back and go, what is the history of this region? And anyways, you're helping me to do that, Joshua, as I'm getting lost in my head. So bear with me. But
glad to help.
Woo. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, we have some comments in the chats too, right? This is also what's very hard to grasp, is that we had a pro-Western region and pro-Western clothing all the way into Egypt, actually. I mean, just to skip over into Egypt, you see pictures of like Cairo University in the 60s and 70s, and you might think it's a picture from America, and you look today, and it's very different.
One of the things that he did, and again, to the point that the Shah tried to force Westernization on his timetable, right? One of the things that he did was start an education program where he was forcing tribals, nomads, essentially to learn to read and write and do math and stuff like that. Like he was forcing them, like the military was teaching them, and he was requiring that they learn this stuff. And it's like,
well, is that different than desegregation? Wasn't the military used there?
Desegregation, and you're talking about Reconstruction, right? You're talking about federal.
If the claim is black kids aren't getting a proper education, and to get that they have to get into these other schools, and we have to use the military to force.
No, this would not be like that. This would be because there was already public education, but it was separate education, racially restricted education, racially segregated education. The Supreme Court said that whenever there's segregation, that's not separate but equal. That because there's no equality in that. In this case, the Shah was saying, you're uneducated, and you're not required to be educated until now. And we're going to take all adults, we're going to take kids, we're going to take everybody, and we're going to sort of force educate you in this way. And that didn't sit well with the nomads, and with the tribes.
It's almost like today with homeschooling, right? You got people that want to homeschool, and they're saying, why is the state, right, forcing me to put my kids at? Is this too stretch, what I'm saying? Or
and again, I think it is a little bit too stretched, because even with homeschool, because here's the thing with homeschoolers, where homeschooling is allowed in a state, the state Department of Education has requirements for homeschoolers, and the homeschool, the parents or the tutors or whoever's, or the program, whatever is entered into the homeschool, has to meet those requirements as to be considered a legitimate homeschool. So, what story? Shamsul.
Well,
no, I mean the story about. Sorry. Wes, go ahead. You go first.
I would say we homeschooled our kids K through 12, and part of it was in Ohio, part of it was Michigan. It depends on the state. So, but yes, you could be declared truant if your kids don't pass the regular competency test. And we had to have our kids tested similar to what a public school would, So,
and then I want Shamsul's take on this, because we're talking about, Wesley homeschooling his kid, or just people homeschooling their kids, but in a let's say classically liberal environment, versus in what was happening in Persia, I believe, is nomads. Like you can watch today where on the Indian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, they'll say, the daughter will say, my dad told me to go to school, and everyone's clapping like, yes, women must be educated. Like, it's still a thing in parts of Asia where, she's a girl, we don't need to put her into school. So in that context, the Shah would have been a big force, right? Saying, no, now we're going to bring these girls into school. But let's get Shamsul's take on this. He's closer to Asia. He's in Asia. So.
Well, what I wanted, Josh, what I mean when I said I doubt that story is because it just sounds too far-fetched about forcing nomads to go and learn mathematics and whatnot. It's just something that from just...
Well, there's video.
Well, I mean, we really, honestly, if you ask me, right, Josh, I don't know. And even if there's video, I mean, I would have to see that video and see what exactly are we looking at. Sometimes when we look at things are not what it seemed, I mean, I come from, when I was growing up let's put it this way. When I was 10, I would probably be about 1974, right? And we achieved independence from the British in 1957, right? So the mainly Muslim population are mostly farmers. And what the government decided to do during that particular period, which is very much post-colonial, and the thinking was very Anglophile, was they decided that they needed the majority Muslim Malays to be more educated. And what they did was they picked quite a lot of us who were did reasonably well during in our what you would call, I don't know, what do you call your primary school in the US? Grade school, is it, Josh?
Elementary,
Sure,
grade school.
Sure.
Elementary school, grade school, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, elementary school. So we ended up in after grade school actually in boarding schools, because they needed what their philosophy was that is that they need to take us out from the rural environment and actually put us into a system where actually we are motivated to actually learn science and mathematics, right? Now, if I were to take a video during those days without any real context, somebody can make a video and says that, oh, these kids were actually taken from their family and put into away from their family. You know, easily I could do a propaganda video on that. You know, but actually, what happened with that particular generation, at least 2 to 3 generation, I realized of mine, was that it was a big leap forward for our generation. It made the generation quite secular. Number one, it made that generation out of the blue. In one generation, we produce engineers, lawyers, doctors, you know. And that was it was a very stark contrast from the 60s jumping into when we graduated from university. By the time we hit the late 70s to 80s. So I can't say to Persia, I really can't say what happened in Iran, right? So that was where I'm coming from, in a sense that, yeah. And if you ask me, did we learn, how was religious schooling during my time in school? Probably 2 hours a week in class, compared to what is happening today in basically Muslim societies, where actually because of 2 things, what I call the impact of political Islam from Egypt and from the Iranian Revolution, it has impacted in a sense that the indoctrination of fundamentalism has become even more compared to when I was in school. In fact, when I was in up to high school, gee, nobody gives a shit, you know. So
yeah, hey,
so I just can't figure it out. And I say anybody could have made a video of us during the early years and say, whoa, we got took away from our families, and you know that was unexpected. If you know that could happen.
Yeah. So let me just be clear. I wasn't saying that the Shah was taking anybody away from their families. It was, and I'd encourage you to check out what was just posted in the chat. And so perhaps I was a little bit off the mark when I said the word forced or whatever it was that I said. I wasn't implying that anybody was taken away from their families. I was just suggesting that the requirements for education were seen as very
reactionary, heavy-handed.
Yeah, okay. as very heavy-handed, and that led to some resentment against the Shah in that way. And really, I was just using that as an example in furtherance of the idea that the Shah tried to westernize and tried to modernize too quickly for the population, and for particularly I think for the tribes and some of the people who were in the madrasas.
Now, Joshua, the note I put down here so I wouldn't forget is the Ottomans, right? Do you have any sense of what the Ottomans did in terms of the youth and schooling?
I have no idea. I have
So this
no
was a big
and
part of.
you're talking about the Ottomans. You're talking about the Ottoman Empire, so the Turkey prior to World War II.
Pre-Ataturk, it was there was this supposedly, this is my understanding, is that the state said we are going to take, almost like the Sikhs, right? The eldest son is the one that wears the turban, right? And so it was like the eldest son would get sent to the state for training. And in the beginning, it was this big scandal. You're taking away our sons. You're taking away our sons. But then the gendarmes, or whatever that force is in Turkey, they would come back, and now all of a sudden they're the proud son, right? They are the militarized son. So it became this. It went from this aversion to this, wow, like, oh my God, I want my kids to go to this military school or whatever it is. All I'm mentioning that for is just to give some, like, if we're going to say the Shah was heavy-handed, then what do we say about the Ottomans or other within the region societies, right? And
well, yeah, but not every population reacts the same way. Not every culture reacts the same way to, to sort of to heavy-handedness like that. And so I don't think you can do a one-to-one, all the time. I just think you can't probably oversimplify that. I think Iran had some has a very specific and unique history. The Pahlavi dynasty is one that's pretty fraught. I mean, between Grandpa Shah, who was a Nazi supporter, and Papa Shah, who was heavily influenced by the
Nazi
West.
support thing. Now, I mean, I don't want to. Do I pick on Andrij or not? But in the time, if you were opposed to Russia, then you're going to be India was, you could say Gandhi was a Nazi supporter. I mean, that.
Well, I mean,
it's true, right? If you shake out World War II, no?
No, I don't think you can say, I don't think you could really say that the UK and the United States were pro.
But even Ukraine, right? Didn't they have to? I mean, this goes into Stephen Bandera and all this stuff. This is where Andrij, if he may be busy, but he could.
He had an interview. He's big time.
I got 10 minutes. I got 10 minutes before the interview. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the premise is, if you didn't like Russia in World War II, then you were automatically a Nazi supporter. Andrij, go.
No.
Whoa.
Right. Yeah. Because there famously people who, not talking just about Ukraine, there's very people who tried to do the in between, and I'm going to fight both camps, and they just got eliminated. So Poland was like that. Yeah.
But okay, Andrij, this is
UK
I tagged you on
UK and the US went right into the Cold War as soon as World War II was over. Like, Stalin was an ally of convenience. I wouldn't even say he was an ally. We just redirected his murderous tendencies to send people to the front and bog the Germans down.
I would just also, the political atmosphere in 1930s America was way different than today. Communists were an actual force in a way that we can't even imagine after decades of anti-communism. How forceful they were, how influential they were for us, first of all, staying out of the war. I don't, for all the people who rail against the blacklisting and stuff, Trumbo was basically a Stalinist who was preventing the United States from entering the war and helping Jews because they were an ally of Stalin. It's insane. But so that's the X factor that we got to always, put ourselves in the mindset of what 1930s America or other countries were like.
And here's another interesting, like, I just want to slow walk this, nationalizing the oil field. So again, how can a prime minister, right? I mean, that's a very communist move. Under the Shah, you have a treaty with the British, right? Just a classic business treaty, right? Hey, British expertise are going to help us leverage this oil field. And then the prime minister is going to just seize it. Isn't that a very communist thing? So that's where, if we're saying the Shah was...
Sorry, Rahul, no, I disagree.
Okay.
I disagree. I mean, the only can I go back to Josh just a short while on what Josh was saying? I only caution when we look at history. I mean, because we are looking at maybe what 60, 70 years ago events in Iran. They're really so much we do not know. So the reason I jump into that and I said to Josh that that story or that video may not represent the fact is because a lot of things can easily be taken out of context. So that's all I want to say on that part.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, Shamsul, look in the chat at Wesley's posts in the chat.
Sure.
I think that captures what I was attempting to say, and perhaps I shorthanded some things a little bit.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Rahul, why I disagree with you on that part of the nationalization of the oil fields, in essence, that you were mentioning that's, I mean, in essence, communism, because that was basically what was happening all over the third world during that period, actually. That not only happened if it was happening in... what was that you were mentioning, Rahul? Where was that?
We're talking about
Iran?
Persia and the Shah and Mossadegh, right? Because Mossadegh...
Correct. Okay. So that does not only happen over there. It was done in Indonesia. It was done even in Malaysia. Okay, because when we went into, in fact, and also Brunei, right? So basically what happened was when all these countries got independence, what they did was, I mean, they formulate laws and says basically that one of the law, for example, for Malaysia, we have what we call the Petroleum Development Act of 1974, which puts all petroleum assets under a Malaysian government entity. We were basically just copying to a certain extent and did well better than what the Indonesians did. So we were taking a page out of other countries, to be honest. Okay, so that I wouldn't equate that to how communism thinks. And you must remember, Malaysia as a country is staunchly anti-communist. So I just a point to make.
All right, I appreciate that, Shamsul. Joshua?
Yeah, I would just say that just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean it's not communist. And I would say, look, well, hold on. Look,
go ahead, Josh.
Harry Truman tried to nationalize the steel industry in the United States in support of the Korean War, and that was communist. You know, and it was struck down by the Supreme Court in the steel seizure cases. So thank you, Dean. But yeah, so just because other places weren't doing it, even the United States of America, that isn't communist, although man, in the 1940s and 1950s, oof. Anyway, look, you know, just because everybody was doing it doesn't mean it's not communist.
Okay, and just for the YouTube viewers out there wondering what the compliments to Joshua were from Dean, it was regarding the shirt. Okay.
Oh.
So, yes. But I did want to bring Wesley into this because I think now we're getting into the role of the state, right? And again, the classic big government versus small government. But now I'm realizing, no. It's all government versus small government, because it seems like when you say big, there's no limits to that. So Wesley brought up an interesting, I just want to share this for the YouTube audience, okay? Let's see, there were 1.8 million homeschool kids in America in 2019, and now there are about 4 million, so almost a doubling. So Wesley, if you wouldn't mind expanding on that.
I mean, I think COVID played a part in that, you know, because parents got to see into the classroom through the virtual, and they didn't necessarily always agree with what their children were being taught. And there is I would say, a leftward or liberal bias throughout education, from the universities on down, and more socially conservative parents, whether it be Christians, Jews, Muslims in our country who are socially conservative, don't necessarily align with the worldview that, and particularly, and I know this is a generalization, but a feminist leaning worldview. And so it's a multifaceted issue. It's not one simple thing. It isn't just, we want to worship a certain way or religious separatism. It is, no, this worldview is different. I mean, I work in Christian ministry, and I was invited to teach our youth, and high school senior, 10th, 11th, 12th graders. And I asked the question, there's about 40 students there. And I asked the question to them. I said, hey, how many of you, what's your 5-year plan? What do you see? What are you going to be doing? And about 22 females there. I think there was a little bit more females than the males, but not one of them mentioned, motherhood. It was all vocation. It was all to compete in the marketplace. And I'm not opposed to, those freedoms at all. I'm just saying that for a socially conservative family, um, there's a difference between what the state would come in and promote for young women and what a socially conservative person might promote for their young women. I mean, the draft is another one. I would be totally against females being forced to sign up for selective service, which was mentioned under President Obama, right? He was trying to implement these things. No, there's no way. I think the men should fight in the wars. I think there's a distinction in gender roles. And those kind of issues cause people to step back and say, do I want the state educating my children, right?
Yes, and I guess the note I had down here, Shamsul, I think it was in your interview where you said if we can just focus on reading, right? Like if you get the kids reading and then inspire them on their own journeys. And look, this may sound controversial to folks, okay? This is a free Bible, City of Agape. All right, they have a service, so I got this free hard copy. Okay, I had a King James version that got misplaced and another version also got misplaced. But free, okay? Now, Leland High School, public high school, note, Pat Tillman went there. Okay, we had to read the King James Version Old Testament just as a matter of English literary background. Okay, that's back when I was a Marxist atheist. Okay, so I was not happy to do it, but I did it because it was part of the school curriculum. Now, okay, getting into historians, and they go, wait a minute, we're not going to throw out the Bible, right? Yes, sure, there's parables, there's metaphors, right? But there's also history. There are names of kings. In fact, in the Old Testament, I'll stop waving it like a prop. In the Old Testament, okay, you will find about Tarak, okay, as one of the pharaohs of Egypt, okay? You will also find Tarak in the Hindu mythology. So we have kings that connect. I also want to plug the Shahnameh, okay? Persian, if we separate fanatics from, okay, let's say, I'm going to try to do it this way, all right? Because Lionel Nation, he's a big YouTube guy, and he says, oh, if there's a billion Muslims, if they really were fanatics, oh my God. Well, Lionel, I'm sorry to inform you that Shazia Hobbs, okay, British, Pakistani Muslim author, okay, her claim is 2 out of 3, when surveyed, okay, follow Hadith, which are these books I've said that come way after the Quran, okay? So that's roughly 600 million Muslims, okay? If we can intellectually wrangle with them, because in the end of the day, it's about lineage, all right? Lineage meaning history. And people of the book are immune, okay? So even the fanatic mind, if it can be intellectually challenged to say, where does this lineage of Muhammad really come from? And you cannot get away from the Shahnameh, the Persian epic of kings, right? Which, while it says the Arabs are the serpent race, the evil race, guess what? They get married together, which is the Persian emperor goes, oh my God, my son married the serpent race. But that's part of history. That's part of the intermingling, right? And some beautiful things happen from there. All we have to do is inspire the kids to read. Joshua, with your hand up.
All right, thanks. Let me cook for a second, Raul. I think we should I think we should be careful about introducing Iron Age foundational myths and holy books into our discussions about politics and culture that we have on this channel. And who am I to say? I'm nobody, but it's just my opinion. I would suggest that in many of these situations, lineages of kings, etc., and things like that, particularly, go to the Old Testament, for example. I mean, we don't know who Melchizedek is. I know you've mentioned Melchizedek before. Like, nobody knows who Melchizedek is. There's
Shem.
no archaeological.
Shem. I mean, the Bible's own scripture points that it's Shem.
Okay.
I'm just within the Bible.
But whatever internal logic is attributed to these texts doesn't necessarily translate to archaeology or to actual human history, right? George Washington, for all we know, didn't actually cut down the cherry tree and tell his father that I cannot tell a lie, 'twas I that cut down the tree. Okay, but it's a foundational American myth. Okay, so I think it's dangerous to look too far into and go down sort of like the religious and cultural rabbit hole, as if it were sort of like a legitimate fact, right? Like as if it's a fact. That's it. I'm done cooking.
Well, okay. Let me then let's cook together, Joshua, because it's not, we're not trying to teach these things and saying, okay, here's the Bible, here's the Shahnameh, this is the absolute authority, right? But if we don't, I was for the taking down of like Confederate statues. So I'm like, oh, these are all, this is the Confederate Masons and this is the remnant psyop. And then but now I'm like, wait a minute. If we're going to take down these statues and put up Lenin, Stalin statues, right? I'd rather just preserve what we have. So in a similar vein, right? If we take out Persian Epic of Kings, if we take out the Bible, if we take out whatever mythologies, folklore are out there, then what's the vacuum that's left? Postmodernism, the books of today, right? So that's where it's like what gets replaced. Duke, you've had your hand up. You haven't spoken yet, so please chime in. Let me unmute you, Duke. There you go.
Yeah, I wanted to say something earlier, but I was out walking the dog. I was just listening. When we were talking about nationalizing, the government nationalizing things, did we not nationalize gold?
Expand on that.
Did we, under FDR, you couldn't own gold.
That's right. Executive Order 6102. That is correct.
Like I said, communists.
Yeah,
well,
and I I don't you nationalize gold, you nationalize oil. I don't believe in the government nationalizing anything. But when you draw that parity between the two, we did it too. we're not clean. And like I said, I just wanted to throw that out there and get some opinions on that. Is it a legitimate comparison?
For me, it is. Joshua may have another opinion.
I don't know yet. Yeah, I mean, look, there are some things that we do, obviously to quote unquote nationalize things, like, we have government ownership, federal government ownership of things. We have federal government, state government ownership of things. And I suppose you could call that some sort of, I don't know. I don't think you can call that. I don't know. I guess you could, a libertarian would call any government ownership of something communist. I think there are different levels on the spectrum. And it's, the idea of holding things for the common good, right? Like, that's where the concept of communism comes from. But it's what's the parable here? What's the parable here? It's like the private ownership versus public ownership. Most of the time, your private your things that are privately owned are going to be better taken care of and better maintained, because there's an ownership stake in a thing, and there's a responsibility for a thing. But when you've got the tragedy of the commons, that's what it is, the tragedy of the commons, right? But when you have something that's owned in common, nobody wants to take responsibility for it, like a public park, for example. No individual that wants to use the park, and who has the ability to use the park, wants to also maintain the park, as well as they might maintain something that they own, their own house or their own property. So it's sort of the tragedy of the commons there. As far as nationalizing gold, I'm just going to look up some case law real quick and see if that see if that carried and see if that lasted.
Nixon, I think, is the one that said, okay, you can now go. But let me throw another one out there. This just kind of a comedy parody, but it is true. I don't know I think it's the Mustang Ranch now in yeah, in Nevada. I don't know whether it was taxes or something. Anyway, they wound up in bankruptcy, and the federal government took over. Now, those who don't know what the Mustang Ranch is, it's a whorehouse and whiskey joint. And damn, the federal government didn't bankrupt it. So, if you can't make money selling hookers and whiskey, you're not good at running much of anything.
And there's a miss between public and private, right? There is mutual, there is cooperative, not state-run cooperatives, which unfortunately is all you will hear. Like whenever you hear the word cooperatives in the general public sphere, it's always state-run. I am talking about the backbone of the American Revolution, Ben Franklin, mutual insurance companies, okay? This is the true industrial capitalistic strength, right? If gold is good enough for central banks, why not for the workers? We lost Shamsul. He went off. He's partying out there in Malaysia.
It looks executive order.
Okay. Shamsul, please hop back in.
Just quick one. I think the on this discussion of communism per se, I think it's just a question of definition. We are arguing on we're just splitting hairs, to be honest, in my opinion. I think
Agreed.
It's and I rather not dwell on it, because personally, I'm a bloody capitalist per se. But I'm just looking at things and saying, I think all we're doing is splitting hairs in terms of definition on certain actions, whether it becomes communism, whether it's socialism, whether it's basically the government.
Okay, Shamsul, now I get to maybe this is a challenging question. In Asia, gold is Asia. We know the Asians, we love our gold. Is it not true? 14 karat?
Depends on depends on the race, buddy.
Okay, but can you imagine? I mean, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, have these places ever made it so that you couldn't hold gold?
No.
So see, this is, again, Americans have lost this, and I only learned about it from Antel Fiketi, rest in peace, that FDR criminalized the holding of gold. And the reason this is so fundamental is because gold was the way you protested government spending, right? In other words, if I trust the government, I hand over my gold to the government, I get a bond, right?
Treasury, you're going to have a riot doing that here.
Doing what, Shamsul?
Taking our gold.
See? But what happened in America? Nothing. So that's why I believe that we are in a World War stance, right? For over a century. And this is what we can't shake people from. And the story that Professor Fiketi talks about is this. The way Caesars, today it's quantitative easing. The way the Caesars did it before, if they wanted the war chest, taxes were collected. Back then we know it was hard currency, and the government would literally shave the coin, right? So they have a circular coin, they shave the outsides and they collect the trimmings. That becomes their war chest. And the coins would get lighter and lighter. Today, what's happening? The dollar is 1,000th as strong as it used to be in the 1900s, right? We've lost the purchasing power of the dollar. What's really crazy, in the Marxist union circles, so-called, they want a weak dollar, okay? And they'll argue for a weak dollar, right? And the whole China example, that, oh, we'll weaken our currency, that it, versus a strong dollar, right? Which is just, you want to have a strong currency.
Rahul, I think, okay, I mean, this discussion takes its own segment, if you ask me, because now you're entering the area of monetary economics, all right? So I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure whether I'm in the right frame of mind or condition to be talking about monetary economics at this point in time. So I mean, I leave it there for the time being. I mean,
here's a point of personal information. That's why coins are ribbed on the edge now.
Was that Duke? Didn't catch you.
Coins of the American coins have ribbing along the edge of the coin. And
so
that's why.
Shave them down.
So
yes.
so you can't shave them down.
Yes. Well, before it became just like token money, right?
Right.
Joshua is unhappy with the claims being made.
I mean, I'm not unhappy about the claims being made necessarily, but you know, look, I mean, whatever FDR did in 1933 and 34, well, I mean, Ford undid in 1975. So, you know, the issue about gold ownership is, you know, not an issue anymore. And, you know, and I'm pretty sure since 1975 or whenever G. Gordon Liddy got out of prison, we've all known that we can own gold. Okay. So,
yeah.
So that's
what about the thing. Don't we own a pretty big stake in Nippon Steel now?
Yeah, now we do with the merger of Nippon and U.S. Steel. And look, and I hear all sorts of conspiracy theories about the petrodollar and Nixon and everything else. And you know, my response to that is, look, America, the United States of America is the wealthiest nation on. I don't know if it's the wealthiest nation on the planet, actually. Yeah, I don't know if it's the wealthiest nation on the planet. I say that, but that's like sort of a knee-jerk sort of catch-all. I mean, maybe the UAE is the wealthiest nation on the planet. I don't really know, but we're up there. And my 401k says it likes the petrodollar. Like it likes what has happened. And you know, the baby boomers and Gen Xers and now millennials are also seeing that. Like we got a real good system going on. So
wait, okay, but see, this is again, Joshua, where I find it like we're in the two worlds, right? Where, okay, there's a certain economic growth, but then you hear again, what are the claims of the so-called left, right? It's like, again, oh, the wages and the healthcare and this, so what's happening to Social Security? So I'm not saying that, okay, individuals holding gold is going to be the revolution. No, I'm saying union leaders need to wake up, smell the coffee, okay? We talk about Marxism. George Seldes, when he interviewed Lenin, right, said, why do Americans hate Russia? Oh, because of Marx. And Lenin goes, but we learned of Marx from an American, Daniel De Leon, Knights of Labor. So these are the dark forces that took workers' unions away from holding gold, okay, and became reliant on government. Because if you have a mutual fund in gold, there's no liability. Gold is the only asset that points to itself. Everything else is debt on the books. Gold, when lumped up, what is the power of the Teamsters or any union? It's not the ability to strike. It's not this negative threat-based thing. It's that we are the talent, right? The actual original purpose of the Federal Reserve, right, is based on City of London, the Billing House, okay? So let me see if I can do my lecture, if I've learned anything. 4 C's of finance, okay? Credit, you issue the credit. Circulation, you circulate the credit, okay? Clearing, you clear the credit. When you clear it, what do you get? The gold coin. 1 gold coin, right, before it actually gets handed over, is circulated via credit. So this paper, the original form of money, gets passed from merchant to merchant in the process of making a shirt, right? You got to get the wool or whatever, or oil, right? It's raw, it has to get refined. There's different actors in place. So this is what the power of unions were. And by having that mutual fund, the union provides the healthcare, the union provides the pension, it provides the training. If I don't want to be a carpenter, it gives me cross training, and that's where you get the jobs from. So no government reliance, none of this taxation, none of this government-run healthcare. It takes the burden off the taxpayer, right? And I only went into these things because in the union world, it was so dark and deceptive. I did so many wrong things, right? And I felt so bad afterwards. Where did it all go wrong? And no one in the union world is going to do this, right? Because they're all in their 6-figure salaries, right? So I can't get around gold in terms of workers' wealth. I haven't been able to do that.
I gotta say, Raul, I very often get very confused when you cook, my friend. No offense, I just very often get very confused.
But riddle me this: Fort Knox, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that's where all the gold went. FDR, right? That's in Book of Secrets. Sure. Netflix. Okay, so central banks, they sit on gold, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes or no? Maybe.
Oh, I think they do.
See, Joshua, that's where I go. Okay, but this is like, yes, they do. Why? Why do they?
Okay. Well, probably to control the value of gold.
To control the value of the dollar.
Family, like the De Beers family controls the value of diamonds. It's a fairly finite commodity. So sitting on it, hoarding it, so to speak, allows them to control the value, and not necessarily the value of the dollar.
Oh, I think it is to manipulate the value of the dollar.
Well, yeah, I mean, it may, but I mean, the dollar's not backed by gold anymore, so.
No, but it has a pretty strong influence.
Yeah.
No, okay, but see, again, we're approaching it. See, but Joshua, you're approaching it from like a cynical, like, oh, the banks are trying to control this and that. But what if it's just, if you have to say to a bank, okay, maybe you want to invest in a bank, or you're just bank A between bank C, banks, D, whatever. What do they own? What do they sit on? What is state? Because unions will go. I still get a pension statement from the Surface Employees International Union, and it's like, oh, we're investing in real estate. The whole lithium scandal with Tesla, right? Oh, Sean Spicer's like, oh, the unions are their own detriment. They're shorting the Tesla stock. It's like, why the F are unions even invested in a volatile thing like lithium, right? So it's like you have to throw out all these historical ancient societies of gold, right? Back to not just gold from superior teeth filling, not just gold in terms of semiconductors and electronics, right? But gold just as a jewelry, just as a precious metal, as something that that's value does not diminish over time.
Okay.
Right. So okay, I'll close with, I'll try to close it with this. A lot of things in this pot here. Money is container of value. Let's not get into it's fungible, this and that. So root definition of money is a container of value. Value in the eye of the beholder, right? Value can be subjective. However, 2 forms of money emerged. Okay, salt, right? Because salt was for food preservation. Salt, it's in grains, right? Very easy to, measure out in small quantities. Salt held value over time. Cattle value over geography, because you can drive the cattle, right? You can cattle droves or herds or whatever. Cattle was value in the large, okay? Salt became silver, small quantities. Cattle became gold. And this is where we are. And then gold ultimately kind of emerged as a superior one. But okay, Shamsul, maybe I lost you, maybe not. Don't think we can solve the understanding here. It might be too much to get into all the monetary stuff. What do you have to say, Shamsul?
Yeah. I think that's a course seminar on its own. I think, maybe I don't know. I mean, are we still live or what's going on?
Oh yeah. Oh my God, the show gotten away from us here. Let's wrap it up and we'll continue the intense discussion.
I think you got away from the show.
That's true.
Rahul, why don't I suggest we wrap it up? I got something I want to chat with everybody and see what everybody thinks about a certain idea I've got.
Okay, great. Let's do it.
All right.
Sorry if we cut anyone off, but that's a wrap. Remember, you can catch us live Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern. It's your chance to join the conversation and have your voice heard. Just check the link in the description or visit americastalk.show. Together, through the free exchange of ideas, we can truly make America great again. Don't miss out. Tune in and be part of the dialogue.